Hello everyone, and welcome to the Biblical Bookworm. My name is Elizabeth, and today I'll be talking about creative fasting ideas for Advent or Lent. And this video was actually inspired by Father Mark's book In His Zone, but I decided to deviate from my usual video structure and not just summarize and review the book, but I use it as one of the sources to talk about the topic of fasting. And this video is applicable to both Advent or Lent or even for New Year's resolutions. So when people hear the word fasting, the first thing that comes to mind is limiting your food intake. But there are definitely more creative ways to make yourself suffer or to mortify yourself. Fasting from food can't be bad, of course, because the church commands us to fast on Ash Wednesday and Good Friday, and Jesus also fasted for 40 days in the desert. The danger I see with fasting from food is that people might do it with the main goal of losing weight and not necessarily to get closer to God. So here are a few other ideas what you could do. The first one or three, depending on how you count, will include an explanation and some advice on how to execute that. And at the end of the video, I'll mention a few other options that don't require that much of an explanation. And finally, I also talk about my opinion on Father Mark's book, which inspired me to make this video. I'd like to start with solitude, which Father Mark talks about in his book In His Zone, 7 Principles for Thriving in Solitude. And in the book, Father Mark explains an experiment he conducted with himself, where he spent 8 days on a raft, and he observed how well the 7 Principles for Thriving in Solitude worked for him. Most of us probably won't copy that experiment, but what we can do is to take some time every now and then to be in solitude, because there are certain benefits to that. Here I'd like to quote Saint Bernard, who said, "You will find something far greater in the woods than in books. Stones and trees will teach you that which you cannot learn from the masters." I think I've also read that somewhere else. I just couldn't find the passage for this video, where someone wrote that we can learn more about God from nature than from books. And as someone who reads relatively many spiritual books, I can agree with that. I would say that it's helpful to have read maybe 3 to 5 books, or maybe the Catechism, in order to have a good basis about our faith. But from there on, just going for a walk alone can be very beneficial. And I'm not just talking here about physical benefits, but also benefits for mental health and spiritual health or spiritual development. I'd like to mention another source which is kind of related to that, namely on the YouTube channel Veritasium. There was a video a while ago on the topic why boredom is good for you. And if you're not familiar with Veritasium, it's an educational science channel with currently about 13 million subscribers, and it's actually one of my favorite channels on YouTube. Even though the channel has nothing to do with spirituality, I think their video on boredom fits very well here, because there they explain that boredom helps people to be more creative, be more altruistic, so they are more likely to donate to charity, and it helps setting goals for the future. I will link that video in the description, by the way, and in the description of their video there are also additional sources if you're interested. Being more creative doesn't necessarily have spiritual benefits, I'll admit that, but altruism obviously has, and also setting goals for the future. That's actually something that we see implemented in the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola, because one purpose of those spiritual exercises is to help you make a decision for your future, especially the decision of what state of life to choose, so what your vocation is. And if you're unfamiliar with the spiritual exercises, I've already made a video about it. But in short, what you do there is you're not allowed to talk to anyone for like a week, except if you have any questions or you need spiritual advice, then you can talk to a priest. And you spend the majority of your day meditating, so sitting in silence with nothing but your thoughts. So what you can do during Advent, or even at any time if you want to, is to take some time where you are free of all distractions, and the only thing you have to do, or you can do, at that moment is to think. That could be on a walk in your room, or if you go to daily mass, because even if you're technically not alone there, you're still in silence, at least if you go to a low mass. Other masses, of course, are not that silent. Father Mark writes in his book that he had a cabinet for solitude where he went in circles praying Hail Marys until he could think of a task to do, and after he finished that task, he continued to go in circles and pray Hail Marys. He admits that it felt weird to do that, by the way. Now, I would like to mention his first principle for thriving in solitude, which is to be aware of the fact that you should expect resistance when in solitude, as we discover ourselves in solitude, which we don't necessarily like. And that's actually the reason why I think that solitude and silence are a good Advent or Lent fast, because they are uncomfortable. As explained in the video by Veritasium, there was an experiment where people were put in a room for like 20 minutes, and there was nothing to do there apart from thinking or pressing a button that would give them an electric shock. And although the participants said before the experiment that they would pay money in order to avoid the electric shock, during the experiment, many people chose to shock themselves to avoid boredom, which showed that humans would rather experience physical pain than boredom. Getting back to Father Mark's book, he also writes there that the biggest temptation when being alone is actually not lust or gluttony, as many might think, but laziness. And it's important to keep busy and pray when in solitude, following the principle ora et labora. His advice on how not to give in to the temptation of laziness is to have a rhythm or, a specific structure in your day, because as he says, keep the rhythm and the rhythm will keep you. But there is also some danger related to excessive busyness, which he calls the demon of busyness, because while laziness lets your heart grow cold, busyness lets you forget God's presence. So it's important not to overload oneself with so many tasks and so much work that you don't have time left to think about God, to pray to God, and not to forget about the ultimate goal, which is heaven. Another principle for thriving in solitude is to beware of the noonday devil, which is the phenomenon that at noon after lunch, people usually are very tired and unmotivated for any work. The solution the author proposes here is to accept that and plan your day in a way that you can do the hardest tasks in the beginning of the day before lunch when you're relatively concentrated and motivated, and save the easier tasks for the afternoon. And the last principle for thriving in solitude is to eat well, as we have to remember that we have a body and a soul, and that we have to take care of both of those. And Father Mark reminds us that we need proper nutrition in order to love God to the maximum of our ability. Now I'd also like to mention a few other things that can be used as a fast, which don't require as much explanation as the solitude, silence, boredom thing before. The first one I learned from Father Mike, who said this in his video on the marks of a true Christian man, which I have watched, even though I'm a woman. And Father Mike quotes Saint Jose Maria Escrivá there, who said that there is the heroic moment every day, and that heroic moment happens at least once a day. Namely, it consists of the challenge to get out of bed immediately after the alarm goes off. I absolutely love this idea because it's extremely difficult but very simple, and it doesn't hurt you in any way to do that. And even though Father Mike mentions that in a video on Christian masculinity, I'm convinced that women can accept this challenge as well. Another discreet thing you could do is whenever you use public transport to choose to stand and not sit, even if you were the only person on that train or whatever. And as far as I know, people don't like to use public transport in some countries, but in Austria, especially in Vienna, that's definitely the normal thing to do. And so standing instead of sitting would be an easy way to offer up a little sacrifice. Then a slightly random idea would be to sleep without a pillow. And of course, there is the option to do classical things like giving up coffee or social media. What I'd also like to mention is that it might be helpful for you to choose something different to fast from or to do every week, because at least for me that makes it easier to actually stick to your resolution, as the end is always in sight and then you have another challenge. Finally, I'd like to tell you my opinion on the book by Father Mark Goring, which was the inspiration for this video, as said before. First, I would like to say that I love the idea of conducting a self-experiment and then writing a book about it. And also the idea to spend 8 days on a raft is not the most obvious thing to do if you want to spend 8 days in solitude. So it's kind of funny that Father Mark chose exactly that option. And in my video on books by Catholic YouTubers, I said that the only thing that bothered me with this book was that it was so short, as it was only 74 pages long, but of course the length of a book does not really determine its quality. Back then, Father Mark also wrote a comment under that video where he explained that his dad told him to keep the book about the solitude experiment short, which of course is beautiful that he respects his father so much. So I would give the book an 8 out of 10. That's been it for today. I hope you liked the video. See you next week. God bless and bye!